Warning, the Savage Nation contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised. Now, here he is, author of Liberalism is a Mental Disorder, Trump's War, and God, Faith, and Reason, Michael Savage.
It is the Savage Nation for the 7th of June, 2018. I'm going to do something unusual today that should shake up the industry. Well, first I'm going to read you some headlines from michaelsavage.com. Now, you know, you can go to other websites to get other headlines. Drudge is the best, and there are others. I have my own way of selecting stories, and the ones that interest me are the ones I put up on michaelsavage.com. So here's what caught my eye. Walrus Bolton pushed to back of Korea team after derailing summit. That's an absolute fact. I mean, it's my headline. Okay, so that's one. Another one is Vladimir Putin talks Third World War and Russia's first World Cup in a 4-hour-long TV call-in show. If only President Trump would do the same. I'd be real happy to moderate it. I'd be very happy to moderate such an appearance by the president. Why does a dictator get to talk for 4 hours, answering questions on every subject? Of course, some of them were not answered, and it was controlled by state-run TV, but how different is that from ABC? You're telling me George Stephanopoulos and Andy Blooper are not part of the state-run media in this country? You're telling me Andy Cooper's not part of the deep state? Guess what? He's as fake as his empty eyeglasses are. Here's another one. Pro-amnesty rep Louis Gutierrez dismisses MS-13 gang violence. Gee, I wonder who he works for. Here's another one that caught my eye. House votes to inhumanely rip ovaries out of federally protected wild horses and burros. If you have the guts to see the story, you can find it on michaelsavage.com. House votes to inhumanely rip ovaries out of federally protected wild horses and burros. Now, I sent that to the White House when I got it from a friend this morning. I haven't heard back from them yet. And I said, I will repeat again, the issue of animals and protecting the earth is a huge issue, whether you know it or not, whether the media tells you or not. If the Republicans want to hold on to the House, they better get off their behinds and understand that conservation and conservative go together. And if they don't want to protect the horses and the burros in this country, the elephants in Africa, they're going to lose women and millennials more so than ever imagined before. In terms of the elections that just occurred on Tuesday, big spending by George Soros. You know, the evil demon George Soros? He spent a fortune, along with other illiberal groups, to sway district attorney races in California, pouring in millions of dollars into DA campaigns. Well, the billionaire upsetter, the New World Order, globalist, evildoer George Soros, thought that they would win, but they lost. Big spending by George Soros and liberal groups fails to sway DA races in California. Instead, the sheriff's deputies and police unions did what they did best, which is put in people who are pro-police, not anti-police. That's a huge story that Soros got defeated. He got a double black eye and a punch in the big beak that he has. He got a punch in the nose and a double black eye trying to sway DA races in Sacramento, San Diego, and Alameda counties. All of them lost to the other candidates, which is a good sign that the people are not as stupid as you may think, George. Go back to Bulgaria, wherever you came from, and go peddle your hatred over there. Should witnesses turn phones over to the Mueller team? I said absolutely not when it came up yesterday. As I tweeted, I think last night or this morning, as I said on the show yesterday, this is now the Soviet Union. Mueller and his team of Nazis are asking witnesses to turn over their personal phones so Stasi agents can examine private conversations on messaging programs like WhatsApp, Confide, Signal, and Dust. Now, the fact of the matter is, without a subpoena, the government has no right to demand your phone. That's number one. But number two, even if there was a subpoena, the witnesses should say no. Absolutely not. This is the Soviet Union. What right does Mueller have to demand that witnesses turn over their iPhones so that his Nazi collaborators can go into these phones and, if they want, implant phone calls that never happened or other things into the memory of that phone? That's exactly what would happen. This is shocking. CNBC reported former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort is being accused of tampering with witnesses through the same type of phone apps, WhatsApp and Telegram. Now, the question is, are we living in the United States of America with privacy, with a due process, with the Fourth Amendment, or are we not? Why is it that liberals are now jumping overboard to demand iPhones from people when the Muslim terrorists, do you remember that case last year or the year before when the two Muslim terrorists in San Bernardino blasted their co-workers and killed many of them? And remember, the iPhones were finally found by the FBI, but Apple Computer, under the guy who runs Apple, whoever, I don't remember his name, Cook said, we absolutely will not comply with the FBI. We will not let you get into those phones. You remember the fight? Where's Apple now? Why is Apple and the big mouth leftists, why are they not saying, no, you shouldn't do this, Mueller? Why? You can't figure it out? Well, those are some of the stories that are exciting my interest today. The phone number here is 855-400-7282. And I want to talk about something else, which is podcasting. I think podcasting is the future of talk in many ways. I know many of you listen to this show and other talk radio shows, but you also listen to podcasts. And so I'm going to ask you a simple question. If I were to continue to do talk radio and also do a separate podcast on occasion, I would not do it every day, and it would not be for 3 hours a day. But if I, Michael Savage, the number one streaming talk show in America, if I gave you content you could not get on this radio show, would you go on to my podcast to listen to it? That's what I want to know, meaning, do you currently listen to talk radio and I don't mean at the same minute, but also tune into podcasts? That's the first question to answer. I don't know if you do. Is it the same audience that listens to talk radio that listens to podcasts? That's number one. Or is it a separate audience? Number two, if I were to give you the same excellent show I give you every day for 3 hours a day, and then do, let's say, a 1 hour podcast, I don't know, maybe after the show, I would make 2 hours later, I would do a podcast wrapping up the news of the day. Maybe I would take you to a restaurant with me. Maybe that would be more fun than the news. What if I took you to a bar or restaurant that I went to? Would you like to see that on a podcast? I'm going to give you an example. Last night after the show, about 2 hours later, I went to a restaurant that I will not name, and it was, I can't even say where it was, but the waiter was a Guatemalan guy, and we were talking for a few minutes. I was having a couple of beers and some chips that I know I shouldn't have eaten, but I ate them anyway. And I had the third beer when I knew I shouldn't have to. But I struck up a conversation with the waiter, and he had an odd tattoo on his forearm, as many men from Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador do. It's a cultural thing. They make these most elaborate tattoos on their forearms. And I asked him, what is that tattoo on your arm? It's very interesting. His arms are huge, like weightlifters. I don't know where they get these big arms from. I want to know that diet. Huge arm, amazing tattoo. And I said to him, what is that tattoo? And he said to me, it's from my motorcycle accident. I said, what? He said, it shows you the speedometer of the motorcycle when I fell off, the day it happened, what happened. I said, well, what happened to you? And he lifted up his pants leg. I'm not making a word of this up. He lifted up his right pants leg, and he said, I have a synthetic leg. What do you call it? A leg, like an iron leg, a metal leg. He lost his leg in the motorcycle accident. And he proceeded to tell me that's why he memorialized it on his arm in a tattoo. Can you believe this? What people tell you if you actually know how to talk. I have an amazing ability ever since I've been young to draw people out. Why they talk to me is a matter of conjecture, but they do. I've always had that ability. When I was in Spain, the Spanish women talked to me, the old women on the train, they thought I was Spanish. And I would nod along and say, si, and whatever I knew was some Spanish at the time. I had 7 years of college Spanish. Then when the train went through France, the old women would talk to me in French, and I'd nod. They thought I was from France. When the train got to Italy, they nodded, and I said the same thing, yes, in Italian. And they would tell me stories, and some of it I understood, some of it I didn't, but I like human beings. Everyone has a story in the world. Did you know that? Everybody listening to this show is a full universe unto themselves. And every universe has its, shall I say, solar systems. Everyone listening to this show has a story to tell. But most people are not asked at all about their lives. or what's going on in their life or what's of interest in their life. I have the ability to draw people out for some reason. So I'm giving you an example. So what if I was doing my radio show and I did 2-3 podcasts a week, and I had my iPhone with me last night as I did, and I podcasted it, and I turned it on. Would you like to have listened to that as well after my show? I would think it's of interest to the world to hear a thing like this. Right, Clint? I mean, isn't that what we're talking about? Moreover, if I did a podcast, what guests would you like to hear on it, if any? I mean, I'd like to have Donald Trump on my podcast. I'd love to have him on my first podcast, and I might work on it. I doubt that he'd do it, but you never know what tomorrow will bring. I might have a human rights expert on with regard to the persecution of Christians by China. Did you know that the persecution of Christians in China is at the highest level since Mao Zedong died? Did you know that? Oh, you didn't know that? Why? Because we're supposed to all love China all of a sudden? Because the greedy businessmen want to tell us how wonderful things are? Christians are being tortured to death in China. I might have a human rights person on the China thing. I would invite Vladimir Putin on so we could have some Russia collusion. I would reach out to Vladimir Putin. I'd love to have him on my podcast. Wouldn't that be great? That'd be terrific. I doubt that he'd come on the show, but you never know what might happen. I see last night Donald Trump welcomed Muslims to the White House for the iftar dinner. Ramadan Mubarak. I think that's very PC of him. And I guess it makes political sense, but I thought that was all over with when Barack Hussein Obama left the White House. But, hey, different strokes for different folks. You know what I'm saying? If they could have me in the White House at the president's desk, I guess they could have an imam there. I guess, it is a democracy after all. So I'm asking you these questions. Tom on KKOH in Reno, I want to hear from you. Tom, what's your comment? What are you talking about? What's your call about, rather?
Well, I was just saying that the airwaves still rule as in terms of numbers of people, numbers of listeners, and you're at the top of that. You're at the top of webcast, and I do listen to you on webcast. The numbers will go down if you go off of the airwaves. But
No. Let me explain what I said. I said I would stay on the radio, and in addition to the radio, I would do an original podcast of about an hour in length 3 times a week with material that you didn't hear on the radio. Let's say I would do an hour on nutrition or a wrap-up of the day's news, which would be different after my show. I'm saying in addition to the radio show you're hearing now on KKOH in Reno, I would also do a podcast. Would you be interested in tuning into that as well?
Absolutely, yes, because you're uncensored and out of the reach of the FCC so far. But I believe...
Oh, yeah, we might stir the pot a little bit if I did that, wouldn't we? Yeah. Maybe we'd call it Savage Uncensored or Savage Unbridled or Savage Unleashed. Or how about Savage Savage? This is the Savage Nation. If you care to chime in, the phone number is 855-407-282. I'll be right back.
Savage.
So once again, I stumbled onto Pay Dirt. I asked you, I read you some news stories. Should witnesses turn phones over to Mueller team? What are the risks? And I told you why not. I raised other questions. And then I said to you, I'm thinking of doing something in addition to my daily 3-hour radio show, which is an occasional podcast. Would you listen to the radio show and the podcast? And I'm getting calls on that right now. But I'm going to expand it. I'm going to expand it to ask you, which guests would you like to hear on this show or on the podcast, number one? I'm going to give you an example. I'm a writer in addition to being a broadcaster. As you know, I've had many best-selling books. But what you don't know is that I also write fiction. Abuse of Power, New York Times bestseller. The 3 in a row, the Jack Hatfield novels, 3 bestsellers in a row. But no one knows about it because it wasn't about transsexuals taking over the world and making the world a better place for mommy. What was Xenon about? You didn't hear about Xenon? Probably one of the most interesting science fiction books of our time, and you'd never heard of it. I posted it up on Kindle. I don't think it sold more than a couple of hundred copies. If I did a podcast, I would read Xenon, for example, for you on the podcast. What is Xenon about? Well, go to michaelsavage.com and look at the drawing I painted of a head with two faces inside the head. It was one of my paintings. I decided to use that for a cover. And what is Xenon about? Xenon. In the Kindle edition, it says it's Enter the Future World State, an anti-utopian new world run by militant FATASs, F-A-T-A-S-S-E-S, FATASs, who castrate males, assign them life mates who are transsexual, keeping the unclipped natural women for the State Security Forces, SSF, to assist the women in charge, WIC. State mind-bogglers, SMs, delete memories and secretly use state gas stores of the noble gases to remolecularize their minds, argon, freon, helium, krypton, neon, radon, and xenon. Envisioned and written in the early 1980s, this prophetic fantasy forecast is Michael Savage's semi-serious alarm of a nightmarish future. In the new world, there are no natural free people. This science fiction adventure is considered a masterpiece of wit and dark humor that accurately predicted the direction of the femme-dominated Stalinist states emerging in former Western democracies. I wrote it in the early 1980s. I put it away until last year, and I decided to release it this year, which I did. Did anyone cover it? Did anyone mention it? Did anyone talk about it? No, but it's the most creative piece published by anyone in the history of talk radio. Bar none. I said the most creative thing ever written by anybody in talk radio, ever. Did you hear about it? Was it featured anywhere? No. That's an example of what I might do on a podcast where I'd have more time to get into something like that. Or I do a whole hour on nutrition and health. Or I take you to a restaurant. Or I take you to the vet when Teddy is having something done. I don't know what I would do. But I would do radio and that. Is that something you'd do? You'd want to watch or not? Yes or no? Simple.
Savage.
Most songwriters are manic depressives, by the way, going back to an earlier topic. See, there's a guy like wrote this when he was happy. Next day in the toilet can, near suicide, probably in a motel in Palm Springs. They had to call 911 probably the next day. Songwriters, manic depressives from the get-go. Now, you give them medication, they're flatlined. They can't write songs anymore, but they're nice to be with. They become nice to hang out with, but they can't write a song anymore. You know, I was thinking about a Frank Sinatra song. I'm going to sit. No, what's the one where he's on a rainbow? I was listening to it last night in a restaurant. What's that Frank Sinatra song? Oh, something on a rainbow. It's so beautiful. I thought about the songwriter writing a song like that, how high he must have been. Probably just a high on his manic phase. Most songwriters are manic depressives, as are most creative artists. And they create despite their neuroses, not because of it. I know that as well. But nevertheless, they're manic depressives. You medicate them, they stop painting, they stop writing, they stop singing, and they stop creating. But nevertheless, we're talking about a number of topics, and I raised them on the show, such as should witnesses turn phones over to Mueller team? I told you why I think that's Nazi-like, Stasi-like. Another topic, Fed spending $350,000 to see if lesbians are using the right contraception. That's the NIH under Donald Trump. Nothing's changed there. The same hotbed of stupidity. The coordinator of the project wants to make sure that she's reaching all women, including lesbians. Huh. She claims 20% of the female population in the U.S. are lesbians or bisexual. I don't agree with that. I would say that's completely made up out of whole cloth. The researcher, so-called, says the overwhelming majority of sexual minority women, that's a new topic, will engage, or I don't want to go into it, it's too ugly. My mother, I sometimes think about my mother if she was listening to the show, what she would think. I don't say certain things. But on a podcast, I would say it. See, that's what I'm trying to say to you. See, I can only go so far on national talk radio with what I actually think. You get about 85, 90% of what I actually think. The other 15% I have to hold back. Here's a story, for example. I'll give you the radio version. Archbishop Welby of the Church of England says the European Union is the greatest human dream realized since Romans because it brought diversity. Listen to this stupidity of this moron. The principal leader of the Church of England has declared the European Union the greatest dream realized for human beings since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. I'm quoting him now. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, made this statement in a speech to the General Assembly of the Conference of European Churches in Serbia on Sunday. He claimed the EU has brought peace, prosperity, compassion for the poor and weak, purpose for the aspirational, and hope for all its people, he claimed. He highlighted how there are, quote, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and many of no faith at all in Europe now, arguing diversity is one of the gifts of the Europe of the EU, but to live with that diversity must call for the gift of reconciliation through the church. Commenting on Brexit, the leader of the Church of England linked the Brexit vote to bigotry. He said he attacks the rise of Euroscepticism, the flames of which are fanned by, quote, scare stories about migration and refugees, according to the Church Times. Now, that's as far as I can go right now on talk radio. If I had a podcast, I would say something on the order, but more graphically, that the principal leader of the Church of England, who has his head up as you-know-what, should be taken and put into an African Muslim village and left there for 3 months alone. And let's see what he thinks about diversity then. Let's see if he still thinks that anyone who fears the invasion of Europe by Middle Easterners of a certain persuasion are bigots. And if they're just Eurosceptic right-wing maniacs. And let's see what he thinks about diversity after 3 months in an African village run by Boko Haram. We'll see if he'd like that. Now, if it was a podcast, I would take off from here and then graphically describe what would happen to him in that village, in that hut, in the straw hut, the Archbishop of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury. This is how out of touch these people are with reality. But since I can only do what I did, that's what I did. So I'm asking you, do you currently listen to this show, but you also listen to other podcasts? And I've asked you, would you listen to this show if it were different on a podcast? I mean, there are news stories, right? But you don't really want to hear that. I mean, go on the Drudge Report, Fox News, Michael Savage, and you can see all the news and about how long it takes you to ignore someone's commentary. About a few milliseconds. You can read the headlines, look at the pictures, and you can decide whether to click on a story. You know, it's clickbait. Everywhere you turn, it's clickbait with pictures. The whole world is clickbait. The whole world of the Internet has become clickbait through headlines and through pictures. Did you know that? So where does that leave us in talk radio? Are we now the silent movies of the media, or are we in the past, or are we still on the forefront of news and commentary? It's something people are asking, and I have my own opinion. I would say if you're stuck on the Trump-Mueller thing, you are the silent movies. You're in the silent movies. There's not a talkie. If all you're going to do is collusion, Mueller, Trump, Comey, every day, till the people want to pull out their eyelids, you're actually in the silent movie business, and you're not going to ever be in a talkie. If, on the other hand, you're willing to take a chance and be creative on talk radio and let it fly, you're in the talkies. That's what this is called, talk radio, talkies. We're not in the silent movie business. So now move into the other realm, podcasting. What's the big deal about podcasting? What is it exactly? Podcasting is basically for people who can't make it in talk radio, but they found a niche business in which they can make a very good living, but they could never make it in talk radio, most of them. Most podcasters could never, ever do long-form talk radio. It's the most difficult of all forms of media. It's the most difficult if you do it right. If you just read headlines or talk about Mueller and Trump, that's another story. You may as well read a script. It's like a live read for an ad for 3 hours. You don't have to think on your feet. If, on the other hand, you're willing to take chances and think on your feet and talk as you would to a friend, colleague, classroom, well, that's another story. That's a whole different kind of thing. So I could bring to my podcasts a lifetime of knowledge and experience in a broad spectrum of areas of interest of mine, whether it be politics, which I've been interested in since I'm 16. Ask the people who knew me in Queens College. I was already interested in politics in the little cafeteria of Queens College. I was talking about politics then. I didn't even know why I was interested in it, but I was. More philosophy than politics. For example, I wrote a paper on Martin Buber. No one knows who he is. Martin Buber was a philosopher of his time. Probably still taught somewhere. And I wrote a paper about him on his great work called I and Thou. I'm the only one in the whole college who knew what I and Thou was about. It's a very complicated piece of philosophy, I and Thou. No one knew what he was talking about. He was a philosopher of a high order. So I wrote a term paper on Martin Buber's I and Thou. Well, I gave it to after I left college and went somewhere else. I gave it to a relative, and she told me that she used it with her name on it. She got an A+. Then she passed it around. I'm sorry. I didn't do it. I heard it became one of the most frequently stolen pieces or used under other names of all pieces in the history of Queens College. Now, I would read I and Thou. I'd find it now. I don't even know where it is. I'd love to see what I wrote. I don't know what I wrote when I was 18. Or I would. What if I read to you from? I have a huge archive in one of my properties of almost every scrap of paper I've ever written on. I'm obsessive, and a lot of them are unpublished stories, for example. But some of them are actually published magazines from the time in the late '60s, the psychedelic era in New York. There was a very big flowering of some crazy stuff, some brilliant stuff in the psychedelic underworld of the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So I was actually the associate publisher of a little-known literary magazine at the time called Exit Magazine. And I have the original copies of this. I don't think they're available anywhere. I looked at it the other day, and I have it up there at the Hill. It's very creative. I don't know who the other gentlemen are who were the editors. It was a very exciting time for me. I remember going to the dingy flats and discussing ideas. Today, these dingy flats in the Lower East Side with sloping floors are probably $5 million for the same apartment with a straight floor now. And, but all right, whatever, to each his own. If you got your mother's money to spend, good luck to you. If it makes you feel worthwhile and cool, good luck to you. But I'm saying if I wanted to, I could read that on this radio show or on a podcast. If I had the time, I would actually tell you the whole story of that literary period, what I was involved in, why I did it. I remember writing a piece called Who is at the Helm. My memory did not fail me. And the piece on who is at the helm was about who should run a society. Which personalities, what type of personalities should run a society? It was my Plato's Republic. It's actually quite interesting. I wrote it from the point of view of a biologist of who should run society. So I was talking about specialized cells in a simple sea creature, an invertebrate called the hydra. You know, jellyfish? So I said, if you look inside a jellyfish, you see that they have specialized cells. There are the stinging cells and the digestive cells, reproductive cells. And I said, just as a hydra, which is a very complicated organism, has specialized cells, we in our society also have and should have more specialized cells. So we do. We have soldier cells that fight for the country. We have police cells that keep the streets safe, right? But do we really have thinking cells in this state of ours? Who are the thinking cells of our state? Where are they? I don't know where they are anymore. Well, what passes for a thinking cell today in this organism called the United States of America? Where are the thinkers of our time? They're absent from the universities. They become propaganda chambers of the radical, degenerate left. What else is a university teaching today? Are they teaching philosophy other than hate Trump? Hate America, hate the police, hate the church, hate your mother, hate your father, hate your grandfather, hate your religion? That's the philosophy of most universities today, especially in sociology and philosophy. So where do you turn for philosophy today? Many of you turn onto this show because I am actually a radio philosopher. If you were to segregate out of all the things I do, take out the political rhetoric, take out the nutrition rhetoric, take out some of the other stuff, and isolate some of the philosophy I've done over 24 years, you'd find that there's actually a slim book of philosophy that's quite good, right? Like Who is at the Helm, things like that. So that's the kind of things I like to do. I'm doing it anyway for you right now on the show, but I'm asking you other questions, on podcasting. How would it differ from this radio show? How would a 1-hour podcast differ? So here's what I've come up with. I'm thinking of doing. I'll stay on the radio, at least for the near future, maybe longer, and then I'm going to do a series of, let's say, 8 experimental podcasts for you. It costs you nothing, by the way. You don't have to even pay for them. You'd probably log on to michaelsavage.com and get them for free. They download that way, and then you listen to them whenever you want. But I would do them 2 hours after my show, probably. Most of the time I would do them in the afternoon or early evening. It would include news, but it might do something like me going into my archives and reading some of this stuff to you, or unpublished stories that I don't have the time to read to you on the air. There's some stories I've written that I think are really good that you'd love. But if you saw, what if you actually you'd see me reading it? It wouldn't be. See, that's the difference. It's audio visual. You get to see me reading it. And given that I'm very animated, I talk with my hands, my face, my eyes, my nose, my beard, my eyelashes, my eyebrows. I would be very animated in the reading of it. So that's what I would do for you on that one. Anyway, I'm just thinking out loud. Is that okay with you today? Do you mind? Would you mind that I do this instead of talking about Mueller and Trump? For 1 second, can we have a Trump-free day and a Mueller-free day? Can we do that every once in a while without fear of losing the audience? All the nail-biters, they got the latest news on what Mueller did. What did Trump do today? What's the latest on collusion? Let me keep up with it. Well, you got plenty of people who do that for you. God bless them all. But you know what? I'm not doing it for you. I'll be back in a minute to do other things for you.
Savage.
It is the Savage Nation, and for a moment we're going to talk about home security, just for a moment. It's a very important topic, because I'm going to ask you a simple question. How many home security companies actually think about how can we protect your home and your privacy? Well, that's why I chose Simply Safe for my show as an advertiser. I spoke to the owners. They're really bright young guys, and they developed a camera you can control from your phone, but they want to protect your privacy as well, so they came up with this idea of a privacy shutter for their camera. And you can hear the shutter click, so you know it's closed. They wanted it to have a light in it. You can tell when it's on. And it also works for the entire lifespan of the system. And they developed this over months by testing different metals and hinge designs. And what they come up with, an effective home security camera with a thin, lightweight aluminum privacy shutter that works every time. And it's this kind of attention to detail that sets Simply Safe apart and keeps your family safe. Simply Safe, it's not just home security. It's perfect home security. They created a special website for my listeners. It's called simplysafesavage.com. Simple, simplysafesavage.com to learn more about the best home security system in the world. Simplysafesavage.com. Jerry on WABC Line 9. What's on your mind, Jerry?
Dr. Savage.
Yes.
Yes. You mentioned that you would like to go on podcast. To use an old phrase, I think it's a no-brainer. You have a definite audience that always listens to you and is looking forward to setting their channel to listen to you tomorrow. I don't think you have to ask anyone what to do. It's a problem with intellectuals that they always second guess. But what people like...
No, it's not like I'm second guessing. I'm trying to incorporate my audience into the thinking process, Jerry.
Well, you want to know...
I would keep doing the 3-hour radio show, and I would add... I'm going to actually probably do it in the next few months while I'm on the radio here. I'm going to add like a series of 8 specials, podcasts, to test the waters, Jerry. That's what I'm thinking of.
There's nothing to think about. You're successful at what you do. Your audience follows you. It's an automatic. You don't have to think about it. They'll follow you.
Well, you like, you know, what business are you in, Jerry? I like your voice.
I'm in the retail furniture business. You know,
and I want to buy a bed from you, but I have an advertiser already.
No, it's not necessary. But you know,
can you send me a dinette or something, a dinette set?
You know what I mean? You got a positive situation going on. You got a fail situation.
Well, let me ask you: if I did a podcast, would you advertise on it?
Yes, I would.
Okay, there's your answer. When I come back, San Francisco's moving to the right. They've had enough of the needles and the bums, and 70 years of left-wing fanatics. Guess what's happening?
Savage. Warning, the Savage Nation contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised. Now, here he is, author of Liberalism is a Mental Disorder, Trump's War, and God, Faith, and Reason, Michael Savage.
Welcome to the Savage Nation, Part 2. I'm trying to show you with this song. Listen to the lyrics, written by... Okay, enough. Now we turn it off. Now off. The Nelson Riddle now. Knock it. Boom. So you say, like, creativity, manic depression, bipolar. All songwriters have to be manic depressive to write a song like... Anyone who writes a song like this has to be a manic depressive. So the guy was high as a kite while he wrote it. Probably the next day, they had to strap him to a gurney and take him out of the motel in Seven Palms. Who knows why he wrote, I'm happy on a rainbow, whatever. The next day, a suicide job. Why? It's just human nature. Creators usually have ups and downs, but more so than the average person. So you medicate them. What you wind up with is no songs, no art worth anything, no nothing, a flatline nation. So we were talking about other things in the first hour. I didn't get to this topic. Here's an article. Troubles in San Francisco push some voters to think Republican. Came from the New York Times. Oh, really? And then they rewrote it for the local Nun newspaper. In this deeply liberal California city, frustration over crises around homelessness and housing are bringing some on the left a little further right. And they quote about some people at a restaurant from the Republican Party. And then the Republican candidate for governor, John H. Cox, who President Trump endorsed, by the way. I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute. I think Cox could actually win the election against Newsom. Because if you run the numbers, incidentally, on the Republican candidates who ran and put them together, they would have beaten Newsom in the primary. That's an interesting fact that you don't know about. But that's a topic for another day. We're going to have Mr. Cox on the show in the near future. But it says among the long-term Republicans were newcomers drawn to the right over frustration with the city's trifecta of every tangible problem imaginable, a large homeless population, record housing costs, and a high rate of property crime. Meaning, if I ever told you how many car windows are broken in this city, you would say that can't be true. So they quote a woman who's lived in the city who says, we're the most beautiful city no one ever wants to come back to. And the streets are dirtier. Syringes scattered throughout downtown. The hotels are dying. City's lower than expected. Tourist numbers in 2017 are a result of seeing people living in tents, attacking people in the streets. And so they say that some liberals are now suddenly waking up and saying, maybe we need a Rudy Giuliani. They mean the old Rudy Giuliani. Democrats have held the city for 6 decades, and they're running out of boogeymen to blame. No kidding. 60 years of left-wing fanatical rule, and the streets are a nightmare, right? Opioid epidemic, bums with syringes, violence in the streets, crime wave. So they need someone to come in and clean it up. But no one's running for the mayorship here. Nobody would want to touch this. But we have a conservative candidate in the primary for the governorship, which is interesting because I think he pulled 23%. Jim, did we get those numbers yet? I saw them. Yeah, he sent it to me. I saw them the other day, and I want to do some math with you for a minute, then talk about my upcoming podcast experiment. So here's the primary results. Gavin Newsom, 33%. John Cox, Republican, 26%. Now, if you take the other Republican who ran, I don't see his numbers here. Where are they? Alan Travis got about 10%. So if you were to add Alan Travis and John Cox, you'd have 37%. So Newsom had 33%, but if you knocked out Villagrosa, he has 13% that would go to Newsom, etc. But I'm not so sure that those who voted for Villagrosa will vote for Newsom automatically. They thought Villagrosa would win because he's Latino. They made that the biggest deal in the world. But people didn't go for him. They went for Newsom, the establishment candidate. But what's going to happen when the election comes, excuse me, is quite another story. I guess the beast thing didn't work as I hoped it did. It would. My IgE may have been pumped up, but not sufficient. The allergies are back. Are there any bees around? Will you release a hive of them in the room here so I stop itching and sneezing? But that's a topic for another day. So things are changing politically. Little by little, the people are waking up. But I really want to talk about the topic that's near and dear to me this morning, which is the whole idea of is Trump bashing enough for the Democrats to win in November? Absolutely not. Here's one of the most despicable statements made about Donald Trump that I've heard yet. It's some Dem candidate, Alec Ross. I don't even know the state is in. Listen to what this fool says in 05.
Donald Trump is a vulgar, demented pig demon. And it ought to be the case that when I'm governor and you are crossing from Donald Trump's Washington into Maryland, you're entering the resistance. That means fighting like hell on issues like rolling back environmental regulations. It means protecting our citizens and guests from the thugs in ICE.
See, if ICE really was doing their job, they would deport Alec Ross as an enemy of the people. They'd throw him out of the country. They would deport him as an undesirable. To make a statement like that about the sitting president, now I criticized Obama pretty hard on this show. I would never have called him a pig demon, ever. But these sons of garbage, these sons of whores on the left have no shame whatsoever in what they will say about the sitting president. And I, for one, have had enough of these pig demons myself. How about you? So I'm giving you an example of where I would like to go, but I just held myself back. If you think I expressed what I really think about what should be done, you're mistaken. You haven't heard half of what I think should be done. But I'm giving you an example of what they're doing. They're pushing guys like me over the edge. You know what I'm saying? But then I asked you about other topics. I brought up the fact that they're doing things to horses and burros under Trump that are sickening me. Yeah, you heard me. I'm pretty clear on my protection of animals, and I read that story to you from my website. House votes to inhumanely rip ovaries out of federally protected wild horses and burros. I don't think that the Trump people know what's going to happen to them in November unless they get on the side of the environment and animal protection, and that means protecting the elephants in Africa, as I've talked about before, as I'll talk about again. And I have so many emails that come to me on the wild horses of the West and burros. Maybe you don't know about it in New York. But if you knew what Zinke is authorizing, I think you'd be pretty upset. It's inhumane to rip the ovaries out of these federally protected horses. And you should know about this. And I have an article on this permanent sterilization of wild horses out west, and a phone number you can call to tell them to stand with the 80% of Americans who want wild horses and burros protected and humanely managed. And it says, ask them to oppose any 2019 appropriations language that authorizes the slaughter, killing, or sterilization of these cherished, federally protected animals. Do you know that we're shipping horses to Canada where they're slaughtered for dog food? Did you know that? Did you know we're shipping horses to Europe where they eat horses? Did you know that? No, you didn't know any of that. Yeah, the Wild West. Well, that's a topic, for example, that may not interest the average listener, or does it? You never know. But I'm asking you another question, which is about podcasting, which I intend to do a series of 8 experimental podcasts over the next few months. And I'll announce it in advance on the show. I'll announce it on my website. I'll announce it on my Twitter and Facebook feeds. And it's free. It's going to be free. Don't think I'm selling you anything. Nothing wrong with selling you, but I wouldn't be selling you. They would be intermittent podcasts to test the waters and see if you'd be listening to those as well as to my radio show, right? And I'm asking you, would you listen to them as well as to this show? And why? Because I would do things that I can't do on radio, number one. I would be able to develop ideas with a longer form without interruption that I can't do on this show. You know what I'm saying? Et cetera. And I could say things that I can't say on commercial radio. Believe me, there are things that need to be said that cannot be said on radio, that can be said on podcasts. So these are some of the topics. We have one open line at 855-400-7282. Let's take a caller, not on the podcast issue. I have lots of those callers, and I'll get to them in a minute, but on the horse issue of ripping the ovaries out of horses. Jim on KMAJ in Kansas, line 6. Go ahead. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Dr. Savage. It's things to where that you look at one snapshot instead of looking at the long history and the long things that they have tried to do with horses to control it. I have been in the horse industry. I raise horses, mules, and donkeys. I understand this situation very well. There is a finite amount of resources for them to do. They have tried giving them like the birth control pills. From there, it hurts the stallions because the mares return in heat and the stallions fight and are injured. They have had the adoption programs out there to adopt the burros and take that on. I have taken in 3 of them. I have trained them, and they have homes, and they are doing well. But to take this as blindly as you did without researching the rest of the facts does no good to the real interest of those horses, to the people that handle it, and to the rest of it, because it is true.
I'm listening to you, and I'm not rejecting what you're saying outright. After all, dogs and cats are spayed, so you're saying spay the horses and burros, right?
Correct. It is a population control item that we have made issues of and are popularized in a lot of other fashion. If you understood the demand on the land, understood the herd dynamics, understood all the rest of it, understood all the other things that they have tried, this is...
Well, here's the problem. Everything you say makes sense to me, but on an emotional level, the voters are not going to listen to what you just said. they're going to listen to the Democrats that would say under Donald Trump, horses and burros are having their ovaries ripped out. Bears are being shot in their dens, including little bear cubs are being hunted down and killed. What are people going to say to a thing like that?
When that you run the two together, you can't separate it. I'm on the side of don't shoot the bears, but I'm telling you for a fact this horse issue breaks my heart. It actually hurt my retirement because I had done for equine to be able to help to retire on as the equine part of my business was taking up. That was my retirement. That's gone, and it's gone for the right, for the left, doing all the things that they did and projecting all the rest of it.
Wait, you said something interesting. You're on the side of you're on the side of humanely of ripping the ovaries out of horses and burros, but you're putting it another way. What about the bears? Why do you say don't shoot the bears?
There's not the population control issue that you have with the bears. It's
all right. So wait, no, educate me then. Then why is Zinke of the Interior Department authorizing hunters to go into places and kill baby bears and their mother bears? Why is he authorizing that?
That I am not informed enough to make a decision on that, but I truly would have to look at population control. I would truly have to look at nuisance. I would truly have to look at public safety. Because you run out of places to take them, you run out of places to give them to.
Well, but the very same arguments are being used in Africa, which is that the human populations are growing exponentially, and the animal populations have to be controlled because both animals and humans can't live in the same place at the same time. So the humans are so successful on the earth today. Disease has been beaten back. There's too much food, so much food. No one's starving. Human populations are growing, especially in Africa, that there's no room for the elephant. So what's the end solution to all of this?
The end solution is figuring out a way that we can all live together, and that includes the animals. And you will not find any bigger supporter of treating an animal well than you will to the one you're talking with.
Before we take a break, and you've taught me and others a very good lesson here. How many baby horses? How often do they reproduce? The female horse.
Approximately one a year, and the reproductive life cycle is 15 years to up to 20 years. So that one mare could produce 20 horses to go from there. 20 times, and you go on out.
I'm glad you told us this. I hope that the Democrat National Committee isn't listening, because very soon they will probably sign them up to vote for the next Democrat candidate. Sir, thank you for your great humane work, and I'll be right back.
Savage.
Find out what I'm talking about now as you listen to the Savage Nation. For the rest of the show, let's go to the callers. WABC Brian, line 3. Fire away.
Hey, Michael. You talk about borders, languages, and culture, which I totally agree with. In some cultures where they have different languages that have different cultures, what about these people who they enjoy horse or they enjoy dog as much as we enjoy a tomahawk steak?
No, that's very logical what you're saying. Very, very logical. So, for example, Koreans eat dogs, Chinese eat dogs, but they also persecute Christians in China. Should we accept that as a cultural norm?
But we're not talking about...
Well, why not? I mean, you're saying it's cultural. They like to beat up Christians, jail them, take their kidneys out in China. Ask the Falun Gong what they do to Christians. I mean, maybe one day we'll become so humane in America, or shall I say so diverse, so understanding, so global and universal, that if we see products in the supermarket for our, let us say, citizens from these wonderful advanced nations like China and Korea, there might be a whole section of ethnic foods like Christian meat products. You could get perhaps creamed Christian, or if you'd like a Christian meat pie, maybe evangelical a la mode. It's coming frozen, I hear. Or perhaps once beaten Christian liver over rice. Or maybe you like something spicier. Perhaps they could make Christian brain kung pao. Or maybe you want some twice beaten Christian kidney stew. And then you'll say, well, I don't eat it myself, but we have a diverse culture right now. It's so wonderful, the diversity. I might not eat the Christian products myself, but there are those who would. We should permit it. Eat dogs. Why not eat dogs? Eat horses. Now make the jump to eating human beings, since they're beating them and killing them in China, and you don't know about it because of the greedy businessmen who are covering up the nightmare of communist China, the radical Mao-like dictatorship, combined with the capitalist insanity of China. You don't know what could happen tomorrow, do you?
Savage.
Donald Trump is a vulgar, demented pig demon. And it ought to be the case that when I'm governor and you are crossing from Donald Trump's Washington into Maryland, you're entering the resistance. That means fighting like hell on issues like rolling back environmental regulations. It means protecting our citizens and guests from the thugs in ICE.
I think ICE should deport Democrat governor candidate Alec Ross for being an enemy of the people. If a man would say that about a president, a vulgar, demented pig demon, when none of us who criticized Obama mercilessly would ever say a thing like that, what has America become that these vermin of the left think that they are free to do this to the sitting president, huh? Now listen to Dem Rep Luis Gutierrez, who is on the side of MS-13 gangs, and say that they're not really that bad. Listen to clip one of Luis Gutierrez in '01.
Here's the strategy of Donald Trump. He beats up on Latinos and immigrants, but it's really a political strategy for the fall of 2018 elections, right? He's trying to fire up his base. All this talk about MS-13 and border security is a smoke screen, right, for politics.
A smoke screen? Is there anyone from Long Island listening to the Savage Nation right now who has an MS-13 story? Something about them coming to your school, perhaps, and reading a nursery rhyme from El Salvador to teach diversity to the children? Is there a police officer from Long Island who can tell us firsthand what MS-13 is about on Long Island and how Donald Trump is the first president to deport these people? And why you think Mr. Gutierrez is absolutely wrong and that Trump is not beating up on Latinos and immigrants, and that, in fact, ICE is doing the job that should have been done under Barack Hussein Obama? I think you should really think about what is going on in this country right now and how vile and how dangerous the left really is for the safety and security of America. 855-400-7282. We're also talking about horses, bears, the environment, my podcasts. Jeff online, line 8. Go ahead, please. What's your topic?
Your podcast, Dr. Savage. Also, thank you for making Xenon available. I downloaded it the first day I heard you said it was available. I believe.
Well, let me talk about that. Do you know Xenon is a masterpiece? It's the most creative thing ever published by anybody in the history of talk radio. And do you know it's sold less than 1,000 copies? Can you imagine that?
I can imagine it. I've heard you say it. I believe it's true.
My other books, my political books, are always bestsellers without Fox News or anyone else. And yet, apparently, these Kindle editions, no one seems to buy them. But anyway, it's a futuristic novel about what the world would look like when I wrote it in the early 80s, and we're very close to it right now, by the way.
Your podcast will be a tremendous hit with, I'll take my sons as an example. I have a 21-year-old and a 27-year-old. They're good conservative boys, and they are very much into podcasts. They don't listen to talk radio during the day like I have the privilege of doing, but they listen to people like Ben Shapiro and things like that.
Who? I never heard of him. I never heard of that person.
Well, but anyway,
bleep out his name. I never heard of that. I really don't want to advertise an unknown person on my show. But nevertheless, I understand that. Well, wait a minute. Hold a minute. So these youngsters don't listen to talk radio, as I know. They listen to they download podcasts. But my shows are also, these radio shows of mine are podcasted, aren't they? I know that many people listen to the show on YouTube, for example, after the show is over. YouTube steals the content, incidentally, which they shouldn't be doing, and that's another story. But when you consider that my show right now is streamed for no money, and it's the number one or number 1.5 streamed talk radio show in America, I would think that there's a huge audience for the podcast of the show, especially if these shows I would be doing would be separate from the radio show, you know. Now, a lot of people are calling about bears and stuff. Let's hear the bear callers. Oh, wait, here's a cop from New York. Theo on line 1 from WABC. Luis Gutierrez dismisses the MS-13 gang issue. He says Trump's only doing it to fire up his base. Now, you're an officer on Long Island. Tell me what it's like.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the radio with Michael Savage and millions of others, Theo.
Thank you, sir. We drive through Suffolk and Nassau County all the time under this constant cloud over our shoulders. The retribution will happen with all the crackdowns. And, you know, there's a park somewhere out in Nassau that they just uncovered, like, scores of graves of all the mutilated people, that these animals, that I will also concur with President Trump, the greatest president of my lifetime since JFK, they are animals. They are animals, and they deserve exactly what they got coming to them. We're not afraid, but we have eyes in the back of our heads. That's all I got to say.
Well, Theo, then why does a representative named Luis Gutierrez dismiss MS-13 gang as a distraction? Who the hell is he working for?
Yeah, well, you know, he's another, you know, and I know, he's another left-wing shill that is playing that game. I even know a certain federal judge that got nominated, and she's doing her work for the devil. But that's neither here nor there. These people...
No, I hear you, but you guys are on the front line of working to stop these people from killing and mutilating people on Long Island. The whole world knows this is true.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not a myth. You know, and I don't even want to venture onto the beaches or to the public parks anymore because, you know, I might stumble on somebody's marijuana plantation and piss somebody off. Or how about all the Santeria rituals and sacrifices in North Manhattan? You know, dead chickens and dead goats and dead turtles and all the offerings they make. I mean,
you know, it's interesting you should talk about that. Where are all the liberal women who cry over a horse or a dog? They don't know anything about the Santeria slaughter and torture of animals in the basements of northern Manhattan?
Not just in the basements, in the parks, in the public parks. You go out, you find dead roosters and such.
But take a look at the garbage that the country is taking in now. Look at the garbage coming over our borders, bringing in the most despicable throwback behavior that was never seen in this country, not in hundreds of years, if at all. Look at the garbage coming over the border and the filth that they're bringing in, not only in terms of murder, drugs, but animal slaughter. And we're supposed to sit here and say diversity is wonderful.
Yeah, well, speaking of diversity, there's Chuck E. Cheese Schumer, DV-1 visa, as a death blow and follow-up to the Immigration Act of 1965.
Listen, you're right about Trump with regard to immigration. He's the first one since the drunk Kennedy opened the floodgates to the third world. He is the first one who's starting to try and put some controls over the filth flowing over the borders and the drugs flowing over the borders and the murderers flowing over the borders and the drug dealers flowing over the borders and the animal sacrifices flowing over the borders. He's the first president to say anything about it. And what was he met with? The most vile opponents America has ever seen. We criticized Obama on this show, on other shows for years. We would never have said the things about Obama that are being said about Trump, and yet the things that they're saying about Trump should rightly apply to Obama, and yet no one dared say it, did they?
No. The last 8 years prior to Trump, I kept my mouth shut about Obama because I'd be up on an EEO complaint from somebody offended in the ranks. So I kept my politics to myself.
Wait, you mean just because Obama was half black, you weren't allowed to say anything about Obama's policies?
No, it would have turned around to I made a racial statement and a slur against that offender.
So that's how he got away with what he got away with. Everyone was afraid to say a word because of the racial issue, not because of any other reason. That put him above the law.
Precisely. Well, look.
All right. Well, look, we know what's going on here. And we also know that Trump needs to be supported 100%, 1,000% with all his flaws, with all of this and with all of that. He's the only thing we got between us and the deluge of the third world. That's an absolute fact of reality. And thank you, officer, for doing the job of Job out there in your patrol cars, having to look around. And it's not only him. I know police. I know people in the CHP who have the very same exact worldview because they actually live. They actually live in the real world. They don't live in the world of the New York Times and the snickerers and sneerers on television. They live in the real world, and they know the dangers of many of these people that are hiding as, quote, refugees, hiding as children, hiding as unaccompanied minors, hiding as dreamers. Yeah, they're dreaming of putting a bullet in the cop's head. They're dreaming of raping your mother. They're dreaming of burning your house down and stealing your possessions. That's the kind of dreamers that you got to worry about. So don't buy the malarkey that they all come here to work and they're going to be the next Einstein and that Nancy Pelosi likes to wash their feet because they're all the next this, the next that. We know the reality of it. We know the reality of it, and we want something done. And by the way, I haven't forgotten what Trump promised us, which is build that wall. Barry on WABC, line 8. Go ahead, please, from New York City.
Dr. Savage, I think your podcast will be a home run. I will definitely be a listener. I live in a beautiful little town on Long Island called Miller Place. In the last 2 years, they have found, I live at the beach, and they have found 2 MS-13 murder victims on the beach within a quarter of a mile of my house. They seem to like this sleepy little community. They bring their people down there and kill them on the beach.
How come Dem Rep Louis Gutierrez doesn't know about the murder?
He makes my skin crawl.
Louis Gutierrez. Louis Gutierrez. You know, when you put your ethnicity above everything else, what you wind up with is a fanaticism that's very dangerous. We saw what happened when ethnicity was put above politics in Hitler's Germany. And when you get a guy like Louis Gutierrez denying that MS-13 is as violent as they are, what you're having is a form of Nazism imposed on the American mind. That's all, period, end of story. This is very dangerous, this kind of propaganda. Well, we're not just talking about that. We're talking about everything else under the sun on the program today. Here's another piece that you'll never believe. This is, again, another slimy individual on MSNBC, I believe. This thing, Micah, this creature, the daughter of Frankenstein himself. Who was her father again? That communist, left-wing, fanatical type who worked as Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, Brzezinski. I'll never forget Brzezinski as NSA director for Jimmy Carter. Brzezinski was such a bigot that if I were casting a movie, and I'm not a director, but if I were, and I was looking for a perfect model for an SS uniform, it would be Brzezinski. Not only his name has nothing to do with it, by the way, his persona, his delivery, his anti-Semitism, his Israel hatred. So he produced Spawn, and the spawn of Zbigniew Brzezinski is called Mika Zabrinsky. You're not supposed to say anything about her either because she's a woman, and she's on MSNBC. Listen to what she said about Donald Trump in clip number 3. You got to hear this before the break. Listen to this.
I know someone who spoke to Donald Trump recently about life in the White House, and Donald Trump's biggest complaint was that he's not allowed to watch porn in the White House. So there you go. There's a little bit of news for you. He's upset that he can't watch porn in the White House.
Are you sure you're not talking about your husband since you got married? Are you projecting that on Donald Trump? How do we know that's true? How do we know the rumors that your husband likes to do the same thing since he married you isn't true? How do we know that, Mika? It's the same unfounded gossip. I don't believe that your husband wants to watch pornography instead of being with you. Why should I believe that Donald Trump is upset that he can't watch porn in the White House? You're an embarrassment to the female species, Mika Zabrinsky, and you belong in the Eastern Europe that your father fled. I'm going to take a break, Mika.
Savage.
Did I tell you this, that the FBI released a report that talks about Internet crime complaints with losses over $1.4 billion? From the 300,000 complaints received by their Internet Crime Complaint Center in 2017, listen to this. The top 2 crime types reported were non-payment, non-delivery, and personal data breaches, and 1,783 complaints were identified as ransomware, which the FBI called particularly malicious because it targets both, quote, human and technical weaknesses. There are many threats in today's digital world. Good thing LifeLock Identity Theft Protection now includes the power of Norton Security to give you additional protection because LifeLock uses proprietary technology to help protect against identity theft, like your info for sale on the dark web. Norton also helps protect against online threats like ransomware. So if you have a problem, their agents will work to fix it. We know no one can stop every cyber threat or prevent all identity theft, but new LifeLock with Norton Security can and does uncover threats you might otherwise miss. I want you to join now, and for the first year, get an additional 10% off the low starting price of only $7.99 a month plus applicable taxes. Please go to LifeLock.com, promo code SAVAGE. That's just for you. That's promo code SAVAGE, LifeLock.com, real important. 855-407-28. See, if I was doing a podcast and I got angry at what I just heard from Mika Brzezinski, saying that Trump is upset he can't watch porn at the White House, I would have combined my discussion of wild horses and Mika Brzezinski. But since this is a national radio broadcast, I cannot combine the two topics of wild horses and Mika Brzezinski any more than I can combine the two topics of Burroughs and Joe Scarborough. But if it was a podcast, I would actually spend some time on Joe Scarborough and wild burros and Mika Brzezinski and wild horses. But since I cannot do it, I will not discuss it at all. WABC, Stan on line 4. Go ahead, please. Stan, you're on the Savage Nation. Go ahead, please, Stan.
Yes, hi, Dr. Savage. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. I am calling from Long Island. I heard your statement. You asked for people to call in. And I am, first to begin, I'm a private real estate investor. I'm a retired broadcast engineer. Hello?
Yes, no, I'm listening. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. Okay. And I'm not really a Trump supporter, but I'm telling you this, and I know a lot of my people are going to be angry. When it comes to the MS-13 and the gang violence, you and Mr. Trump are 100% on point.
Well, are you saying the gangs are hurting your real estate values over there in Long Island?
Real estate values, and there's something that I've spoken to black mayors about. What's happening is the influx of the illegal aliens are so high, it's taking away the resources from the minority.
There you go. There you go. Well, guess what? The African-American communities know this.
Michael Savage, a host like no other. A host like no other.